This is Mark McNeese, and you're listening to One Thing or Another, the interviews. Welcome to the podcast. This is Mark, your host, and today I have a guest on from New York City, where I used to live, and she's in an industry that's close to my heart, which is book publishing and writing. It's Liz Francis. She's the founder of Street Noise Books. Liz, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you, Mark?
I'm good. It was nice chatting with you in the virtual green room, which is what I call it, before we started, so I could learn a little bit about you. I just want to tell people that for the past 15 years, you worked as an art director before you started Street Noise Books, and book designer in the big publishing houses in New York City. You collaborated with lots of gifted writers and illustrators, but in the wake of the 2016 election, presidential election, you became passionately driven to advocate for the power of love and compassion in the face of hate and oppression. I think an awful lot of us identify with that and understand that. But tell us a little bit about Liz, the 411.
Well, I live in Brooklyn, and I love to travel. I love people watching. I'm fascinated by people and their stories. And I also am very moved by art. I feel like art is a really powerful medium that sort of brings out the best in humanity. A lot of times humans disappoint me terribly. The hatred and the just evil meanness toward each other. But art is just something that, for me, elevates life to a whole nother level, be it visual art or writing or theater or movies, or just beautiful things, architecture. So I've been working for a long time, as you said, as an art director at the big publishing houses, and I love to make books. But I guess I came to this point in my middle age, and it did sort of dovetail with the presidential election. That was part of sort of my soul searching time, where I really rethought where I was in life. And but I'm the kind of person that I sort of love to learn new things. I love to try something new. I sort of have this crazy thought that I can learn anything,
Mm-hmm.
that nothing should be impossible. And I guess that's sort of part of who I am, and I love people and their stories. So I guess that's sort of what I'm about.
Now, I have a question, because we were talking earlier, and I do know a lot of authors, and I've talked to agents and that sort of thing. But what does a book designer, an art director do? That's something I'm not familiar with at all.
Okay, so it's sort of I remember when I first started getting into it, it was this funny thing that I heard that a lot, what you said, even from my own parents. What are you doing? I don't understand. Are you drawing the pictures? And I was like, no, like, not, those are illustrators. Designers are the ones who make the book look the way it's going to look. And so a lot of times they're mostly recognized for the covers, right? Because covers are clearly something that's been designed, right? It has a font, it has, either a photo or an illustration or really strong typography. The color really matters. Everybody sort of has a sense that, like, a cover doesn't just come from nowhere. Like, someone has to actually design that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But even the interior of the book, the shape, the trim size of the book, whether it's a tall, skinny book or a wide book, or, is it sort of square, or those are all design decisions that are made by the designers. And then the font that the text is in, even if it's a book that doesn't have any illustrations, even if it's a mystery like you're talking about, like what do the chapter openers look like? What does that heading look like? Does it convey that feeling of dread or eeriness, or, is it sophisticated, or is it like playful? Like all of those things are subtly designed by the designer and the art director. You can do things like put the type in a slightly lighter black color, so it's like grayish, or where are their page numbers on the page? Are they at the top? Or are they at the bottom? Are they in the middle or on the side? There's so many things, even in the most simple book, that go into making it look beautiful as an object, and also really affecting the experience of reading that book. And ideally, probably in most cases, like novels, you want that design to be sort of invisible. But it will affect the reader in a way that they don't realize.
Now, how did you? Go ahead.
Oh, and then I was just going to say, if it's a book that has art in it, or is a graphic novel, which is what Street Noise Books is specializing in, there's a lot more. It's more obvious what the designer has to do, because you have to decide, is the background of each page going to be black or gray or red or purple, or how is it going to look? What are the flaps going to look like? What about the spine of the book? So there's a lot that goes into it. It's a huge project every time a book is designed. And some people put more into that. Some publishers put more into that than others. But it's something that I'm obviously very passionate about. So our books at Street Noise are, we put a lot into our design.
Well, before we move into Street Noise, how did you end up taking that route as opposed to something else that an artist might do? How did you end up in books?
That's a good question. I've always loved books. My grandmother lived in New York City and worked in a rare bookstore when she was young and before she had kids. And then even when I was later on in her life, she always worked in little bookstores out in Connecticut where she lived. And my mom is a voracious reader. My sister and I are big readers. So books have always been really important to me. But I studied art history in college. I didn't study fine art. I never really saw myself as a fine artist. I'm more of an appreciator of art. And designers have a different role than an artist, right? They're sort of working with material that already exists, and they're creating something that will be useful. It's not fine art that is something that you just appreciate for what it is and you hang it on a wall or whatever. So I actually first, when I graduated from college, I went through the Macy's executive training program. I wanted to be in fashion, but I didn't want to be a fashion designer. I wanted to be in the sort of business of fashion. I was fascinated by New York City and all the different fashion houses. And so I became a buyer at Macy's, and then made a career shift, and I went back to school and studied design, and just ended up in book design.
Okay.
It's really different than being a fine artist.
Oh yeah, I'm sure.
It's working, and it's also like being an art director. In my role as an art director, I would often be working with illustrators, so I would be directing them, which is sort of like being an editor for art. Do you know what I mean? Like if you're a writer and you have an editor who's guiding you, who's sort of like taking what you're trying to communicate and fine-tuning it, or helping you to hone it and make it the best it can be. Well, that's what an art director does with illustrators. They sort of see the direction that the illustrator is going, but then they also have the sort of the big picture of where the book needs to be, and so they help craft whatever it is that the illustrator is doing, help the illustrator get it to that place.
Okay. Now, with Street Noise Books, let's talk about that and how you made that, the inspiration for it and making the transition into founding it and starting it.
Sure. Well, it was, one of those points in life where you sort of reflect and say, is this where I want to be? I had achieved a certain amount of success in my career, and I wasn't really feeling like this was all I needed to do. And it was sort of that midpoint in your life where you're sort of like, okay, am I going to sort of stay on this tangent and sort of coast my way until retirement? Or wait a minute, no, what do I want to look back on life and see? And I thought, I really want to be my own boss. I want to see what it's like to follow my own dreams and my own instincts and help to lift up the voices of people whose books I think should be out there in the world. Because when you're working for a big publisher, especially as an art director, you don't have any control. As an art director, you don't have control over what books are being published. You just are handed something, and then your job is to sort of make it look great. Back in the 80s, when I was first working as a book designer, art director, I used to say I was doing Queer Eye for the straight book, because I would take these books that really needed help to get them to that next level of beautifulness and excitingness. But you didn't have a choice of what books you were doing. And sometimes something would come across my desk and I thought, this would be great. We should really publish this. And I would suggest it to the editors, and for whatever reason, they would say, no, we're not really wanting to do that one. And then they'd give me a book to work on, and it might not have been something that I was very excited about, So I wanted to see what would it be like? Like, are my instincts good? How would that be? What if I followed all of my dreams and actually, to see if I could make it work? And then I'll either succeed or fail. And all I want, it's not about making money. It's about having a life that feels fulfilling and exciting and meaningful, and that I'm able to lift up people's voices who I think need to be heard, and make a difference in the world. And that was my feeling at the time. And then the election happened, the presidential election. And I, like so many people, I was just horrified and devastated. And mostly I was disappointed in humanity. I thought, how the hell could so many people want this to be the direction we're going in? Like, it was just so foreign to me. And I thought, something is wrong here. How can this be? But then I had to really do some soul searching and realize that maybe I was part of the problem, because maybe I was too comfortable in my sort of liberal life, where I was like, I'm not spreading hate. I'm spreading love, like in my life, because I'm just a nice person. And but then I realized that I wasn't doing enough. I was just, through my inaction, maybe I had helped to create a world in which that hatred could thrive.
Yeah.
So it was really sort of one of those moments where I said, I've got to use my powers for good, as they say, and what can I do? I really believe everyone should be doing what they're good at and what they love doing, but doing it for good. So if I was really great at writing songs, or if I was a great, actress or whatever, I would do that for the cause of promoting social justice and compassion, and building a world that is the one that I think we all want to see, a place where everybody is respected, where people's differences are celebrated, where, everyone has a choice to love who they want to love and be who they want to be. And so I challenged myself. I said, let me see what I can do. And what I can do is make books. That's how it happened.
Now, speaking of the books, not everybody knows what a graphic novel is. I sort of do. I will admit that I'm not a graphic novel reader, but can you inform anybody listening as to, they might think, well, what's the difference between a novel and a graphic novel? There's a big difference, but can you explain that?
Sure. Well, we publish primarily graphic novels. Some of our books are not graphic novels, but they all have very strong elements of art as part of them. But graphic novels, I sort of fell in love with that genre about 5 years ago when I was working at Scholastic, and it's comics, right? It grew out of the comics world. And the most famous ones that everyone always has, or usually have heard of, is Persepolis, or there's also Mouse, or more recently, there's an amazing series called the March series, Trilogy, by Representative John Lewis. But they're stories told in comics panels. The reason they're not comic books is because they're much longer. They're the length of a novel, usually, so 100, 200, 300 pages. They can be black and white. They can be color. They can have so many different styles depending on the artist's style. Sometimes the artist is also the writer, but sometimes they are separate. Sometimes there will be one person writing the words and somebody else is drawing the art. It can be done all different ways. Oh, and also another one that got a lot of attention maybe 5 years ago is called Fun Home. That was turned into a Broadway show. Yep, that was originally a graphic novel. And so I remember I went to a conference and I went to a seminar on reading graphic novels, because I thought to myself, just like what you said, sort of, I just don't really know about them. Like I sort of like them visually, but because of my visual background, but I thought I sort of get hung up. I used to read comic books when I was a kid, but I get sort of hung up on how to read a graphic novel. And so this really great editor gave a seminar on sort of how to read a graphic novel, and she was talking specifically about nonfiction graphic novels. And I hadn't thought of that specifically as a genre before, but I'm so excited about them now that that's what we specialize in at Street Noise Books. So it's, by nonfiction, it's usually, what we do is it's usually someone's own story. So we call it a graphic memoir. So it's usually someone telling their own story in the comics format. And I just feel that it is an incredibly powerful medium, because especially if someone is drawing the art and writing the words, and it's their own story of their life, something that they want to share with the world. They're not only, anytime a memoir is written, it's in your own voice, you are sharing your story with the world. But if you add another layer to that of your own art, you're drawing for the person what it felt like, what it seems like to you. So your memory is even more visceral for the reader, because it's actually drawn in your hand. I just find that, and that's what Fun Home was, that's what Persepolis was, that's what Mouse was different, so Mouse doesn't count. But Persepolis, Fun Home, and the March series, those are all graphic novel memoirs.
Now, where do you find your authors?
Well, because we're a brand new publishing company, and we have 2 books out already. One came out in May, one in June, and then we have 2 coming out next month. I'm very excited about. So we're very fresh and new. And so finding authors was sort of an interesting challenge. And we don't have a huge budget to offer like the big publishers do. We do pay advances and royalties to our authors, but they're modest by comparison to what the big publishers can pay. And so I can't compete, with the big publishers. So if there's some big name graphic novel person out there and they're going to, that's going to go to auction and the big publishers are going to compete and I'm just throwing up my hands. Like, I can't do that. That's like too rich for my blood, right? So we really focus more on debut authors who haven't been discovered yet. And oftentimes what I've also discovered is that by focusing on debut authors, we are doing what I set out to do in the first place, which is providing a platform for the voices of people who wouldn't otherwise be heard. So sometimes that means talking to someone who didn't even really realize that they had it in them, but I will spot something in their art and say, this is something beautiful. I love their art. And then I talk to them, and if they have some interesting thing in their life to share, and they're up for it, I'll encourage them to sort of develop their ideas and maybe, make it into something like a memoir. It's been really exciting. So I go to a lot of Comic-Cons and comic arts festivals to meet artists. Usually the smaller ones are the places where I can really connect. Those big Comic-Cons that everyone hears about in like San Diego or New York, that's just so hectic and crazy and fun, but not really a great place for networking and meeting new undiscovered artists. But I sometimes that works there too. But I find that, I just have my eyes open all the time, and you never know. Like, I go to a lot of events when it's not a pandemic. I go to lectures. I go to art events. I go to Broadway shows. I go to off-Broadway. And I try to really push myself to connect with people when they inspire me. When there's something about someone that hits me in my gut, I try to reach out to them, connect to them, see what they're up to. Who knows? Maybe something could come of this. And it's just great fun, right? To connect with people that are creative and doing cool stuff. It makes your life so much richer anyway. But things have happened in sort of serendipitous ways. I was at a Broadway show a year or two ago, and I tweeted I posted about it on Instagram, and I gave a shout out to two of the actors who I really liked. And one of the actors responded and said, "Thank you for the shout out." And I was like, sort of starstruck. Ooh, he responded to my mention. And but I got up the courage and I DM'd him and said, "Hey, would you ever be interested?" Oh, because I did some research and figured out that he had a fascinating life story. So I said, "Have you ever thought of writing a book?" And he said, "Let's talk. I've been thinking about that." So it's been surprising how many times that kind of little thing that you don't think you don't go into it thinking, I'm going to do this so that I can find a new author. You just go into it because you want to experience things and you want to meet people and hear their stories, and then be open to the idea that one of them, somehow something could come out of that.
Can you tell us some about the books? You've got 2 books out now, I believe you said. And I'm looking at some. I just want to hear about the stuff you have coming out. I noticed this one. I just caught my eye. It's "We Should Meet in Air," a graphic memoir on reading Sylvia Plath. I I like that because I was Sylvia Plath and Ann Sexton and Nikki Giovanni. Those were all, I devoured them when I was in high school. I'm probably
Oh, I'm so glad to hear that.
oh yeah, I'm probably older than this author, but yeah, oh my gosh, they were big influences on on my writing too, because I just tangentially, people have, once in a while I'll be talking to somebody about writing, like, and I've said, if you want to develop a good ear, read poetry, read a lot of poetry, because you learn economy of language, but also the emotions. Plath was a great poet. So anyways, that caught my eye, but I'd like to hear about the books you've read.
No, I'm so glad that book isn't coming out till next year. It'll be out in May of 2021. The author is still working really hard on it. Her art is amazing, and it's very time consuming. It's like, it's very, very detailed. And she's drawing, it's really interesting. She's dovetailing her own high school years, and her sort of struggles with, exploring her sexuality, trying to figure out who she is in the world, and her family relationships and friendship relationships and romantic relationships, and sort of coming out as, or sort of starting to identify as queer at that point in her life in high school. But she was a huge fan of Sylvia Plath, like so many people right at that, I think it's so common that people in adolescence are inspired by people like Sylvia Plath, who, who have such beautiful and poignant and powerful use of language. And so Lisa wanted to have a graphic novel that is sort of parallel. It alternates back and forth between Lisa's life and Sylvia Plath's life. And interwoven is bits of Sylvia Plath's writing, her poetry and her prose. But I think it's going to be she's working on it now. So, working on the beautiful final art, and it's going to be amazing. So that's something to look forward to next year. But we have, we have so many, I don't know if you feel this way, but I assume that everybody does. But to me, my books are like children. Like, I feel like I love them all, and I love all my authors, and it's hard to talk about one without giving a shout out to all the others. But okay. One of the ones that I'm really excited about and want to tell you about is a book that's coming out in the end of August called Spellbound. And that is a graphic novel memoir by Bishak Som, whose parents are from India, or were from India. And Bishak is a transgender woman who was trained as an architect and worked for I M Pei in New York City for a while, and then decided a while back to sort of quit architecture, because what she really wanted to do all along was make comics, but she sort of did the architecture thing to please her parents. She went to Harvard, and and then she made this incredible book of sci-fi. Well, they're sort of like, I think I like to call them feminist sci-fi short story comics that came out from the feminist press in April, called Apsara Engine. It's absolutely gorgeous. It's like a coffee table book. It's really beautiful. But as she was working on that, she was also making diary comics. And she had not identified as transgender yet at that point in her life. She's one of those people that came out later in life. She likes to call herself sort of a late bloomer. But it was through making these diary comics that she was drawing herself as a woman, even though at the time she was identifying outwardly to the world as a man. So it was, as she explains it, it was really making the comics was sort of central to her exploring her gender identity. And so out of those diary comics, she's crafted this beautiful memoir that has, at the beginning, there's sort of an introduction that's also in comic form of her talking directly to the reader as Bishak now, as a stunning transgender woman talking to the reader. Then she goes into all of her diary comics, and then at the end, she comes back to the reader and addresses us all directly again. And some of the reviewers, I think Kirkus, called it a meta memoir, which I thought was fabulous. I love, like, Kirkus is so can be so erudite sometimes in their language, and I love the thought of her memoir being a meta memoir, because it's sort of like on a whole nother level. But it's beautiful. Her artwork is stunning. You can really see the fact that she used to be an architect, because it's so precise and her lines are so crisp, and her use of color is really masterful. So that's coming out at the end of August. I'm really, really excited about that book. It's called Spellbound. And the title was inspired by Susie and the Banshees' song Spellbound, which is my era. Bishak and I are sort of similar age group, and I love when my authors have musical taste that sort of hits mine, because it's sort of fun for me. We have a book out now already that came out in May called Shame Pudding. Shame Pudding is also a graphic memoir, and that's by a British woman named Danny Noble. She's so talented. She's got a really quirky, fabulous art style. It's all black and white line drawings, very pencil-y, but it sort of feels like it's so real and gritty and honest, and it explores the relationship between herself and her family, and specifically her two Jewish grandmothers. One of them used to pinch her cheeks when she was little and say Shana Punim, which in Yiddish means beautiful face. But when Danny and her little brother were little, they didn't understand what that meant. No one explained it. And so they misunderstood it and thought she was saying shame pudding. And they would look at each other and say, why does she keep saying shame pudding?
That's funny.
But it's delightful. It's funny. It makes you laugh and it makes you cry. And she ended up in her sort of late teens joining a ska band as the singer and traveling around England in a van with the other band members, and they get into all sorts of trouble. And she does all sorts of protesting and marching and sign posting, which appeals to my political activist side. So that book came out in May, so people can get that from any bookstore right now. And we have a book that came out in the end of June called Stupid Black Girl, that's the only book that we have right now that isn't a graphic novel, but it's a collection of essays by a woman named Aisha Redux, who is an American African as opposed to an African American, because her parents immigrated to this country from Africa. So Aisha is a first generation American, which is interesting to hear in her essays. She sort of gives a lot of really unique insight into how the world looks from her perspective. And she addresses issues like sexuality and spirituality, and racism and sexism, from her perspective. But we hired an amazing artist named Brianna McCarthy, who's from Trinidad, and we sent all the essays to Brianna in Trinidad and asked her to just do a piece of art in reaction to each one. We didn't give her any direction. We just said, she's incredibly talented and can do anything. So I knew that whatever she did would be breathtaking, but they're really, really stunning. So the book has 20 essays and 20 pieces of art that accompany them, which I think is fun because I don't really know of any other books of essays that have art.
Mm-hmm.
But Aisha grew up, her dad was an African art dealer, so she grew up surrounded by really, really powerful African art, and it was really inspirational to her. So she loved this idea of incorporating art. And it also gives the reader, in the same way that I've noticed that books of poetry often incorporate art, I feel like using art in a book of essays has a similar effect in that it gives you a moment to pause, and it gives you a way that gives the reader a inspiration to reflect on what you've just read. I think it's a really powerful addition to the reading experience to have art incorporated.
Oh yeah, it sounds it. Now, what is?
And we have many other books too. But go ahead.
Oh, just Crash Course, because I'm looking at that and I'm thinking wouldn't want you to forget somebody.
I know. Okay, good. Crash Course is coming out in a few weeks. That's on, I think it's August 4th is the publication date for that. That is an amazing book. Woodrow Phoenix is a black man who grew up in South London, and he had some tragic experiences as a child that his older sister, I believe, was killed in a car accident when she was quite young. And it inspired him to write this book. So he's an artist. He makes incredible black and white art that's very bold and graphic. But he was really angered and horrified and moved to do this book that's really it's almost like a manifesto on the toxic relationship between people and cars. And it's a subject that I hadn't really, to be honest, I hadn't given much thought to until I read this book. And it's very powerful. It's a book that came out, a version of it came out in London, in England, 10 years ago. And I loved that version, but I wanted, in order to bring it to the U.S., make it relevant to what's happening today, and in this country in particular. He added a whole huge amount of new content. Specifically, he added a whole discussion of the phenomenon of driving while black and the danger that not only do cars pose a danger to pedestrians, which is what the original book was mostly focused on, but to take it to another level, if you're a person of color and you're in danger, even if you're the one behind the wheel, because as we've all heard, you can get pulled over for anything or nothing. And then your life can truly be in danger because of the violence that police officers have inflicted upon black people.
Yeah.
So he really does a beautiful job of bringing our attention to that, as well as the increasingly horrifying phenomenon of cars being used as weapons.
Running over protesters.
Right. But from Heather Heyer in Charleston, in Charlottesville, Virginia, a few years ago, when she was run down by a white supremacist, and now they're running into protesters. Sometimes cops are running into protesters, but even just angry people are running into protesters.
Yeah,
so,
there was a woman killed a few days ago.
Yes, it's horrifying. And I think his book is really timely because for what's going on right now, but also an interesting aspect of it is that because of the pandemic, urban areas like New York City have been really rethinking our use of the space. And, I don't know if you've been to New York since the pandemic, but they've created all sorts of pedestrian walkways and closed down a lot of streets because, especially a few months ago, there were no cars on the street, and but people needed to get out, especially if you lived in an apartment in Manhattan, you needed to get out and get fresh air. And so why have these big open spaces of streets being wasted? Yeah. Why not block them off and let people use them for strolling along? And it allows for more social distancing. And people were also riding bikes more because all those people who used to take the subway everywhere, suddenly we're not feeling okay about taking the subway. So we're all hopping on our bikes and riding. So there's a lot more attention being paid to bike lanes. And some really visionary people are rethinking how cities are being used in this country and how we want to see them used in the future and how we want it to be a more human-centered environment. And so I think that Woodrow's book, Crash Course, is just incredibly timely for this moment. It was interesting because it was supposed to be published back in May, and with my distributor, we decided to move it out because back in April, when we were making this decision, everybody was sitting in their home. Like, no one was going out. No one was thinking about cars, so why would we talk about cars and pedestrians? And that just wasn't on people's minds. So we pushed it out to August, hoping that the pandemic would be over by August. Now, the pandemic isn't over. But I'm really happy to hear that one of the many things that are happening in this society right now that are good is that people are rethinking how cities are planned and how we want to allocate space. So, I don't know about you, but I'm very energized by what's been going on in the last month and all the protests and the Black Lives Matter, the real, strong attention being paid to Black Lives Matter, all the wonderful victories that have happened in terms of stopping the Dakota Access Pipeline, tearing down Confederate statues and getting rid of Confederate flags, and that huge march for Black trans lives in Brooklyn, I guess that was about a month ago now, right? Yeah. Just so many really, really, really positive things that I don't know that I would have ever dreamed that this would have been happening at this time. And in some ways, maybe it takes the horror of what's been happening on one side of the political spectrum to really energize people to come out and fight for a better world. So I'm excited because I feel like we're all joining together to really rethink, not only like I did a few years ago when I had sort of one of those moments where you rethink everything and think, is this the right direction I want to go in? I think the whole country is hopefully doing that as well. And am I doing enough? We should all be sort of thinking that every day.
Well, I hope so. I hope that's all the case. I do think it's extremely stressful and strange times that we're living in. On the one hand, there's a lot of potential, a lot of good things happening. But I will be ready. I will be happy when the year's over because, either then everything just goes dark or there's a way out of this. Now, I do want to go ahead and wrap up. I want to thank you for coming on the show, but tell people how they can find Street Noise Books, your URL, and books. Sure. A couple of the books are available, as you said.
Yes. our website is streetnoisebooks.com, and we have strong presence on Instagram. So if you're an Instagrammer, please find us and follow us. It's at Street Noise Books. And we're also on Twitter at Street Noise Book. And all the contact information is on our website. So if you want to reach out, my personal email address is right there. So drop me a line and let me know what you think about our books. If anyone, all the books are available on any online retailer. I like to encourage people to order them from their local indie bookseller because, they're all struggling to stay afloat right now. And so, if you can, just go online or give them a call and order, but they all have access to all of the Street Noise books. So anything you've heard about, you can find through any of those online retailers.
Excellent. And it's been really nice talking to you. I've learned a lot, and I love what you're doing. And you're not hard to find. I mean, I emailed you and you wrote back. So, and like you said, that's usually the case. So when I started interviewing people, I realized that most people are happy to talk to you. Yeah. They'll give you the time.
I know. Well, I find that some celebrities are pretty hard to track down.
Well,
I've tried to do that to get to see if some of them will blurb my books, and it's quite challenging when they have that agent in between. There's like a firewall. But the rest of us, we're just living our lives, and most of us, if we're passionate about what we do, we love to interact with other people who are curious, or I love to hear what people think of our books. All of my authors are really, really anxious to hear what people think. They want that dialogue. So they're usually pretty accessible, and I certainly am.
Liz, thanks again for coming on and talking to me. It's been great. And now I'm going to turn my air conditioner on.
Okay.
It won't
Thank you, Mark.
It won't interfere with the sound. So good luck to everything you're doing. I think it's fabulous, and it was great to talk to you.
Okay. Stay cool and stay safe.
All right. You too. Bye.
Okay. Bye.